let me go back to a little anecdote from back up in the 1950s, I believe. Egypt decided to take back the Suez Canal, and prior to that, the British Empire had owned it, and they had been the power, the world power, and they said, Egypt, not going to happen, and they, in their typical arrogance at the time, thought that they will just tell the world how it's going to be, and that's the way it's going to be. When America stepped up and said, actually, we've done a deal with Egypt, and Britain, you will mind your P's and Q's, thank you. And with one slap across the face, Britain ceased being, like a world power, and it very clearly became that it was, it was America's time, along with the Soviet Union at that time. But that was like a really, just an era-changing event where the torch was passed from Britain to the United States. And I think we're kind of seeing that again. With Syria a little while back, we saw, the US government machine said, yes, let's go and have another war, invade other people. And, certainly with the help from the American people, fortunately, and that was really important. It was the first time ever the American people had managed to stop a war before the government had got them involved. And so that was quite cool. But also at the time, you remembered, Putin came out smelling like roses. He was dressing down Obama and the whole American system, saying, "Come on, guys, you can't just be doing that, and that's just not cool. We don't know what's going on." And later on, there's certainly enough evidence to suggest that possibly it was the people, the rebels who were involved in that chemical gas attack. So, Putin comes out smelling like roses. For the first time in, half a century, the United States gets a little bit of a backhander across the cheeks, and it's like, oh, okay. And now we see, just a few short months later, now we see Russia taking, the US trying very hard to destabilize the regime in the Ukraine, give it a more Western-leaning, get it integrated with the European Union, and Russia steps in and gives them another little backslap across the cheek, and it looks like, Russia's going to walk away with Crimea, and they run elections, and they end up smelling like roses, and you get America. Well, so I think this is a really significant thing here. Like we're looking at this transfer of power, of world power, certainly decreasing in the power of the U.S. machine as a global entity. So that has a whole bunch of factors.
Well, there's one little part with that though too, is that Russia supplies a lot of the gas, right, and natural gas and stuff to the rest of Europe. So are they going to really hit Russia that hard?
Is the United States going to hit Russia?
Well, no. Even Europe. Europe's going to go and bite the hand that's feeding them or giving them gas at least, or powering them. And so, what are they going to do? Get too tough with them right now? I don't think that's really very feasible for them if they're trying to play a long game.
Exactly, you're 100% right. Whereas typically we'd expect Europe to back up, the United States and the West. Here we're seeing tremendous economic incentives for them to, partner up with, say, Russia and push America out of the deal and not side with them. So again, it's more evidence of this transfer of global power. And so, all this kind of stuff adds up. And so now you see, okay, well, there's like the military thing. We talked about Syria, we talked about Crimea and the Ukraine. And that's the military angle, but there's also the economic angle, which is where you're starting to go now with the oil and gas. But there's also several other things. So let's look, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the SWIFT system. If you've ever transferred money internationally, you'll know you need a SWIFT code.
Right.
And that's the method by which all of the banks kind of, the central clearinghouses for international banking transfers. And the whole world runs off the SWIFT system, which is like it's a US legacy system. And as a sanction against Iran, the United States said, well, we're going to try and cripple your economy because we think you're doing, weapons of mass destruction. So as a little smack on the wrist for you guys, we're excluding you from the SWIFT system. And the Iran economy has suffered tremendously as a result of that. So now, what did other countries look at and see when that happened? They said, well, wow, there's another method by which we are very vulnerable to the United States global power. So the BRICS nations, which is Brazil, Russia, India, I missed that one, South Africa, and China. And they've got together, and they're making an alternate system to the SWIFT system. And so, they're building that now as we speak in preparations for, any time in the future, if the United States wants to give them a little slap on the cheek and say, hey, economic sanctions coming your way, you're out of the SWIFT system, they're now prepared and position themselves to be prepared to be immune to that. And so all this kind of stuff is just like in the mix, and it's very, very clear. Like no matter which way you cut it, no matter how you look at it, And I think for the better. It's easy for me to say. I'm Australian. I don't have the loyalties that many of the Americans have. But there's that issue of just absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so you have that issue of America's perceived itself as the policeman of the world for a long time, and the rest of the world is saying, well, we're not necessarily happy with that. So we're going to build the mechanisms, the tools, and the military, and everything else to where maybe in a more we can share some of that power, because everyone wants the power for themselves, and they don't want anyone else to have it. So that's what the world's kind of moving to. Now the ramifications for that in the economics world and the banking world, are very, very significant.